Hi everyone, welcome to the 6th episode of Under Control. My name is Paul Bartlett, and on today's show is Jitty van Doodewaerd, who's the Privacy Director of DMCC Netherlands. Jitty has worked with the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs as a big data expert and members of the Privacy Commission of VNO-NCW. In this episode, we will discuss the background of the Schrems II judgment and outcome which has invalidated the Privacy Shield Act between the US and Europe. Hey Jitty, thanks for joining today. What I'd like to do is to get started with a bit of background about your company and the sectors that you work in, and we'll just go from there. I know we've got one particular topic which is going to be very interesting for me, myself and the listeners around the Schrems II. So over to you.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm Jitty van Doodewaerd and I'm a director at DMCC Netherlands. We are basically a consulting firm and moreover in the area of privacy, e-privacy, telecommunications and IT security. And what you see is that, in the past years, organizations always have to be diligent with data. And we advise a lot of companies, charitable organizations, NGOs, publishers, telecoms, organizations about their use of data, mostly for commercial purposes. So for marketing or campaign ads, the use of Facebook, the use of Google, that kind of things.
Okay. And so you basically focus right across the board there. And when you say the privacy, so what does that cover? I mean, obviously it's GDPR, but what else is there that you advise on?
Well, we also do a little bit of, we do privacy, but also a little bit of consumer protection. So unfair commercial practices. So in the Netherlands, you have very strict regulation on, for example, the sales of energy to customers, and you have to make a measured offer based on their actual use of gas and electricity. And what we do is, they make these offers via telemarketing or doorstep selling. And what we do is we get all the telemarketing conversations that were, I think that they had in a certain week. With potential consumers, and we see whether or not they are compliant with rules and regulations. So not only privacy, but also the Telecommunications Act, the Do Not Call Register, and the made to measure offer. So do they really use the use data of the consumer and make an offer based on that data?
And how many of you in your organization? Is it quite a large organization?
Yeah, we are. I think we have about 20 people working for us right now, and we also work with a lot of independent contractors who basically do the auditing of the phone conversation and also some mystery shopping. So we've trained them especially for that purpose.
Okay, mystery shopping. That's interesting. Yeah. But we got another topic today, which I'm keen to hear about because I'm not too knowledgeable about this, which is the Schrems II result, and what was the outcome of that? I take this is something which was reflected to the US Privacy Shield.
Yeah, true. I think the Schrems II is a topic that basically has profound impact on all European organizations. Schrems II is the outcome of a very long court case, and now it has a final decision within the European Court of Justice, which basically says that all data transfers to the US under the Privacy Shield, which I will explain in a bit, are illegitimate. And the Privacy Shield was basically a kind of regulation, a set of mutual agreements between the European Commission and I think the American Chamber of Commerce, extra agreements about data protection, allowing companies, American companies that would stick to those agreements to also process data of European citizens, because under the Privacy Shield, they could ensure an adequate level of data protection compared to the level you would have under the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was found illegitimate by the European Court of Justice. So basically all organizations using American suppliers such as Google, Facebook, Salesforce, MailChimp, whatever you can think of, might be in trouble.
I see. And in what case then is if they're in trouble? I mean, when you say it's invalid, the outcome, and it's been passed, what can companies expect or not expect now?
I don't know, because we're kind of in a situation where the reality does not reflect the legal reality for one bit, because every organization uses American suppliers, but with the ruling of the EU Court of Justice, most of that usage has become illegitimate. So you're basically using suppliers without having a legal basis. And of course, there are some ways in which you can still process the data legitimate, but the outcome is very profound, as I said already, because it basically says you cannot use American suppliers anymore under the privacy shield. There are some alternatives. So the European Commission has some standard contractual clauses. And if you have Google processing your personal data or you use Facebook services or MailChimp, you can get into one of these standard contractual clauses with them in which they basically, again, contractually promise to ensure an adequate level of protection. Also, the EU Court of Justice says you need to check whether or not those standard contractual clauses can be upheld by the company in question. And that provides with a whole new problem. Because if you look at the ruling, the basic problem is that the American surveillance, also under the privacy shield, still had too much access to European citizen data. European citizens didn't have enough means to take you to court if they felt like their privacy was infringed. So even if you have the contract in place, the question still remains whether or not the companies who have those contracts can protect you from the surveillance of the American government.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what would happen in this? Well, I mean, I know you say it's a gray zone, but what would happen now? I mean, a lot of companies are probably in a bit of a dilemma now because they've probably got contracts with US companies, and
They made major investments. They made major investments. They have an infrastructure based on Google Docs, or they use Microsoft Office. They do a lot. So probably the European Commission has already said we'll be looking into this and we'll be updating our standard contractual clauses, and we'll be looking if we can make a privacy shield again, but it probably remains very much insecure. So I think what we advise businesses is also take a look at the American suppliers that you use. Take a look if they already have their standard contractual clauses in place. If they don't, make sure that they get some, and also use some common sense. Maybe the storage of email data in the US is not that bad, but maybe the storing of very sensitive, like, for example, patient information or special categories of data about medical history or sexuality. Maybe you want to reconsider storing that kind of data with an American supplier and check if there's a European alternative.
Yeah. And where do you see the industries that are most affected? I mean, I can just think of a couple that I work with now that you're telling me about this, and I'm thinking maybe pharmaceutical data, maybe where there are clinical trials going on, where they collaborate and share information across the Atlantic.
I think the impact there is the highest, because even if you don't, the GDPR requires you to provide for an adequate level of data protection. But if you process special categories of data, as for the instances that you described, you are to ensure the utmost level of data protection. And also with this ruling, you should be wondering whether or not storing your data with an American service provider is meeting those requirements. So that's definitely an issue. And also Schrems, which is the man, he's a privacy activist who actually initiated this court case, has issued complaints with, I think, 101 European-based companies for their use of Google and Facebook.
Right.
You can already feel where that's going, right? Because they will probably have to respond to that complaint. But also the GDPR offers very much possibilities for collective redress, so that consumers can issue a complaint and it can be a court case with remedies and stuff like that. So it's very much exciting to see what's going to happen.
For some people, it may be exciting. For others, it can imagine it being quite daunting at the moment.
True.
Certainly for US companies. And so, where do you see right now? There's not a solution for this, but do you see something potentially what you see personally that could resolve this, could resolve these issues, or is it just so big at the moment that each sector is going to have to look at it different ways that they might be able to manage and handle it?
Yeah, for me, I wonder whether a new privacy shield or updated clauses can actually tackle the problem. It will probably lead to a situation where it will be allowed again for a couple of years. But when you truly investigate what the American government can still do even with these contracts or a shield in place, I think you would have to come to the conclusion that it's more than a European government would be able to do. So or that would have to fundamentally change. And if it doesn't, you have to look at alternatives. So maybe you can still store your data in the US, but do an encrypted. Or some providers, such as I think Microsoft, but also Salesforce and Amazon, offer the possibility to have your data stored on European servers. So maybe if you store it in Europe and you store it encrypted, that would be an alternative as to, again, go and deal with American suppliers under a renewal of the shield, then wait for another court case, and then be in the same predicament 4 years later.
Yeah. So I'm thinking as well around when you're touching on sort of data sovereignty, data residency options, where does this come into play? Is that also something that can basically soothe the problem a little bit more by having these options in place, even if you're working with American company, but the American companies ensuring that that data is not leaving the GDPR region? Is that potentially one option as a solution?
I think that that's kind of the best way to find the solution, because I don't think the American surveillance will change its method of working that soon. So I think the companies themselves will have to come up with smarter ways of processing data and of storing data to comply with the GDPR, because otherwise, it will probably not happen now, and it will probably not happen in 1 or 2 years. But when you do need a new IT infrastructure, then having an American-based supplier would be considered a risk, which would probably make you look at a European-based supplier earlier if these issues aren't tackled anytime soon.
Yeah. And that being said, I mean, we've just seen obviously we've all been experienced with the case of COVID-19.
Yeah.
And I know personally my son's been working online from Google Classroom, for example, which is again US provider. And it seems like, or could seem like that for certainly in the near future, a lot more people are going to be working remotely. And again,
Yes,
that presents an
definitely.
additional challenge as well. Is that your feeling as well?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the infrastructure that the organizations provide has been essential also in the times for COVID. I've been having so many
Mhm.
Teams meetings myself, so I've been using it also. So on the one hand, you have the efficiency it brings, and also
Yeah.
the technology it brings, and on the other hand, you have the threat for privacy. And I think that's something that is a problem for all kinds of organizations. My mother-in-law is a doctor, and they needed to talk to other doctors and talk to their peer, but they've been looking for a long time for a video conferencing option that was actually safe. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of question for very reliable, very high data privacy infrastructure solutions, I think.
Yeah, but I wanted to step back and understand a little bit more about the US Privacy Shield. What does it mean in layman's terms for people who don't know anything about it? I mean, if you're running a small business in Holland or in the UK, is it going to affect you? Is it going to impact you? Or are we just thinking that it's Microsoft dealing with someone like BASF or something like that? Where's the potential impact? Is it for the SMEs as well as the large enterprise customers?
Yeah, because the potential impact of the ruling, of the Schrems ruling, is, I think, as well for SMEs as for big
Hmm.
companies. Although if you see, it will probably first impact the larger companies.
Hmm.
However, if you look at this data economy that we live in, you can have an SME with 20 employees and still have a lot of data
Right.
that you process. And probably if you're an SME, you don't have the money to have your in-house developers building you a homegrown platform. So
Yeah.
you'll be more inclined to use the existing platforms of Google and Microsoft. And the ruling does not make any difference between large and small companies.
Uh-huh.
So if the ruling says it's illegitimate, it's as illegitimate for an SME as it is for a larger retailer or e-commerce company. So I think it will have effects on all of them. But
Hmm.
the bigger or the smaller effect, I think you should search more into which categories of data do you process.
Hmm.
So if you process very sensitive categories of data, I would seriously start thinking about moving everything to a European supplier. But if it's regular, like customer data, then of
Hmm.
course with the right precautions, you can still use your American suppliers.
Hmm.
But the impact is quite profound, because basically European law says you cannot process personal data outside the European Union if there's no adequate level of protection. The validation of the privacy shield,
Hmm.
America does not offer a valid level of data protection anymore.
Hmm. Understood. When we say the US Privacy Shield, what does that mean? Because I know that some people know about that, but certainly there'll be a lot of listeners out there who have no idea about the Privacy Shield. I mean, where
What
did
it
it
is.
come from, and what is it? How does it impact them? I mean, probably a lot of people don't even know that they're exposed to it potentially.
No, that's true. I think the Privacy Shield was a solution, a practical solution to a problem. It used to be called Safe Harbor. Again, the European Union says you cannot process personal data outside of the European Union because those countries do not have an adequate level of protection. However, there are some measures which can be taken to ensure an adequate level. Those are standards contracts that you can have with individual companies, but you can also make some kind of self-regulatory or regulatory scheme that companies will abide by. They promise to abide by. You need kind of a mechanism for customers to issue a complaint if they think that companies do not abide by these rules, and these rules have to be in writing. So Safe Harbor and later the Privacy Shield were actually a set of rules designed for American companies, which they would adhere by. And because they lived by those rules, they were thought to have an equal privacy protection as offered to European citizens under the GDPR. But now these rules have been found invalid by the European Court of Justice. And so the entire scheme of regulation in that way is no longer possible. So now you have to look at individual contracts again.
And I just picked up somewhere about when you mentioned the word surveillance. Is there potentially the level of surveillance going on is more than adequate by US entities or even US governments involved in this as well, where maybe under some kind of terrorist law, some terrorist act, we went through the 2000s, where there was a lot of information that needed to be shared between different governments. So are they collecting potentially, or they've been heard to be collecting more information than they actually need on citizens?
Yeah, that was a major issue. So the major issue in the European Court of Justice ruling and the major issue also with data storage in the United States is that companies also with use of the Privacy Shield cannot really protect you from surveillance by the American government. And there are some, also in the Privacy Shield, there are some extra requirements for surveillance by the American government. So basically, they need to have some kind of thought about any transgression you might have made, but it's not as strict as it is in Europe. And the transgression should be in the field of, terrorism or espionage or some other kind of threats to the military or stuff like that. But it's still very, very broad, and so basically it's too broad. And also, as a European citizen being investigated by the American authorities that way, they felt that even under the Privacy Shield you didn't have enough mechanisms to issue a complaint and to see justice done.
Understood. But I've got a question which is a little bit closer to my heart, which is, what do you think about obviously the UK exit now around the EU and how that's going to impact privacy? Are we going to see something similar coming along the lines of that we're going to have an agreement in place between the UK and the European Union about data, because of course they were part of the GDPR family. But I'm starting to see already customers coming to me asking, have you got a data residency option in the UK? Can we move our data into UK servers?
I think what the case is with Brexit, because obviously with Brexit, the UK is not part of the European Union anymore. And so it is a country outside of the European Union. And by default, it is not thought to offer the same level of data privacy protection as countries within the European Union that have to comply with the GDPR. However, it is possible that as a country being outside the European Union, you still adapt the GDPR, even though you're not part of it. So I think some of the Scandinavian countries have done so. So data transfers with Scandinavian countries is considered to be legal because there is an adequacy decision of the European Union saying that, okay, they might not have the GDPR, but they do have privacy legislation. And it looks so much like the GDPR that these countries also ensure an adequate level of protection. I think it's already the case for like Guernsey and Jersey and the islands. And it's also the case for, I think, Argentina. And probably some kind of construction will be thought out for Great Britain after the Brexit as well.
Yeah. Because I'm just thinking, our friends across the pond there that we have a great relationship with, after Brexit, those companies that are based in London or in the UK that also have tentacles and operations within the European Union could add a lot of complexity again around this privacy shield or anything that gets presented in the future. right? With data.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, because especially with the introduction of the GDPR, it had a profound impact because it requires a lot of more administration.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be able to show GDPR compliance in the same way you have to do so financially. So with auditing and with a paper trail showing the compliance steps that you have taken. So
Mm-hmm.
if there's a Brexit, it definitely means that you need to do more research, you need to do more contracting, you need to do more auditing to make sure that the suppliers and the partners that you work with in the UK are also compliant to the rules of the GDPR.
Yeah, because I do follow Australia as well closely, who has this kind of this law which needs providers to share information if requested by law enforcement agencies. And I know that obviously the US is another one, the UK is another one as well, that's trying to follow similar lines. And I'm just trying to sort of get your feeling about how that could play out in the future as well. It could make the whole environment very, very complex for businesses.
Yeah, it definitely can. We already see that, well, most businesses that we work for have very much like their customers and appreciate their customers and want to make sure that they are compliant with the GDPR rules. But if you look at the complexity of the landscape of data processing, of the IT infrastructure, and of the contracting, you kind of can't do without specialists anymore. Just as you have an accountant, you need somebody who knows privacy because it gets so complicated.
Yeah. Okay. This has been fascinating, Jitty, to have your input and feedback on this. Jitty, thank you very much for joining us today. Bye now.
Bye, guys.
Take care. And that's it for today's episode of Under Control. You can find links to all of our social platforms and to our guests in the episode description. If you like the show, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Join us in 2 weeks' time for the next episode.